They say the dead can't speak, but in 1844, two twin boys in rural Kentucky proved otherwise. And what they whispered from the cradle was a truth so vile the doctors tried to erase it. The church buried it, and history pretended it never happened, but the echoes remain. And once you hear them, you'll never unhear them. Asterisk, the hills of eastern Kentucky in 1844 were quiet, raw, and untouched by time, before railways carved scars through its chest. Before the cities, before the maps. There were just the trees, the wind, and the silent dot in one isolated valley tucked beyond the ridgeline of Dead Man's Hollow, a one-room wooden cabin set on dry, cracked earth. The Whitlock homestead, a house passed down 3 generations, built by hand. No church nearby, no lawmen. Just folk traditions, isolation, and the stubbornness of frontier blood. It was just after the first frost of November when Mary Whitlock went into labor. Her husband Ellis rode through the night to fetch the midwife, an old widow named Gertie. Stills, known for her hands and her silence. Gertie had helped birth over 50 children in the valley, but what she witnessed that night she would never speak of again. Not in words. Only in the eyes. That permanent expression of a woman who had seen something break reality. Mary was young, only 19. Small for her age. The pregnancy had been difficult. There had been whispers that the child kicked too early, too often. That Mary would speak in tongues while asleep, eyes open, mouth dry. That she'd been seen standing motionless at the well for hours, staring at her own reflection in the water. The birth took hours. Gertie worked by candlelight, the flame flickering against the wooden walls like ghosts reaching out. The screams were endless. But when the babies finally came out, the screaming stopped. Not just from Mary, from the room itself, like the world paused. Like the air had been sucked into some invisible void. 2 boys, twins, born only minutes apart, but not identical, no. Mirrored. One had a freckle below his left eye, the other, right. Their hair curled in opposite directions. Their heartbeats were in reverse rhythms. But what terrified Gertie most wasn't how they looked. It was how. They sounded. Because when she swaddled them, they began to laugh. Not a baby's laugh. Not the clumsy giggle of innocence. But something cold, timed, synchronized, a deep, unnatural chuckle from 2 mouths still slick with blood and afterbirth. Mary stared blankly at the ceiling. She didn't ask to see her sons. She didn't speak again that night. Gertie didn't. Sleep for 3 days. Ellis returned with the town doctor, Samuel Bell, the next morning. A rational man, educated in Lexington, trained in both medicine and the new emerging sciences. He had no patience for superstition. He believed in causes, in diagnosis, in facts. Until he saw the twins. They did not blink. Not once. Dr. Bell ran a full examination. Pupil response, reflexes, pulse. Every time he waved a hand, flashed a light, or snapped a finger near their faces, they only stared, eyes wide. Deep black. So black that he could see his own reflection inside them. He later recorded in his personal journal, "These children present no signs of normal emotional response. They do not cry. They do not flinch. They only ... observe, as if cataloging me. Mary named them Elias and Ephraim, no reason. Just names that came to her, but she refused to feed them, wouldn't touch them. They had to be nursed by a neighbor's wife who wept every time she held them, but couldn't explain why. The valley began to change within weeks. It started with the birds. They stopped singing near the Whitlock land. Then the dogs began barking at nothing. Then the dreams. People around the valley complained of strange nightmares. Always the same, 2 boys standing at the foot of the bed, holding hands, whispering gibberish that left a burning in the ears. And then came the animals. The Jones family's cat was found hanging by its tail from a tree near the Whitlock barn, gutted. A dog, ribs shattered, tongue missing. Chickens with their beaks torn clean off. Ellis tried to ignore it. He worked longer days, came home drunk. He refused to hold the boys, called them freaks. But Mary, she'd started sleepwalking. One night, she was found in the woods barefoot, cradling a rock, humming a song no one recognized. When asked what she was doing, she answered, feeding them. The twins never left their room. They never crawled, never cried. Just sat side by side in their shared cradle, always touching, eyes following anyone who entered, perfectly in sync. If one turned his head, the other followed. If one smiled, the other did too. Ellis tried to send them away. Hired a traveling family to take them north to relatives in Ohio. But on the road, the horse collapsed mid-gallop. Heart attack. They tried again a week later. Different carriage. Different route. This time, the wheels snapped clean off. The driver's hand broke in 2 places. By the 3rd attempt, Ellis was convinced. He built a door inside the house and nailed it shut. The boys were locked inside. From that moment on, the Whitlock cabin no longer had visitors. No more church gatherings. No more help, but the boys could still be heard, laughing, singing, speaking in tongues no one in the valley recognized, not German, not Latin, not anything written in books. Ellis started sleeping with his musket. By the 9th night, he hadn't slept. Neighbors heard screaming from the cabin. When they arrived, they found the front door wide open. Blood on the porch. A trail of bare footprints leading into the trees, both adult-sized and child-sized. Mary sat in the corner of the room, her dress soaked, muttering, "He saw it in the glass." Ellis was never found. Days of search turned up nothing. Number. Body. No blood in the woods. Just a message scratched into the inside of the boy's cradle. Mirror. Dr. Bell returned 2 days later, this time alone. No bag. No tools. Just questions. He asked Mary what had happened. She didn't answer at first. Just stared at him, eyes sunken, hair falling out in patches. Finally, she whispered, "They are. Not new. They are return." He didn't understand. She lifted her hand and pointed toward the door the boys were locked behind. They don't grow. They remember. He unlatched the door, and what he saw next changed him forever. The twins were seated on the floor. Not standing, not walking, just sitting. But around them, carved into the wood with tiny fingers, was a symbol, a perfect spiral, unbroken, endless, drawn over and over again in a pattern so intricate that even Dr. Bell, a man trained in geometry and architecture, could not replicate it. The lines were mathematically impossible. Some curved where no human hand could. Some ended in points that disappeared into the floorboards themselves, and in the center of the spiral sat a broken shard of mirror. The boys were staring into it. Both smiling. Dr. Bell tried to speak. His throat closed. His vision blurred. In his journal, he wrote, "I felt them reach inside me, not with hands. With memory, I was watching myself through their eyes, not the man I am, but the man I will become." And I wept. He never returned. Weeks passed. Mary no longer left the house. She stopped eating. She stopped moving. She sat, day after day, staring at the wall, sometimes mouthing words, sometimes humming. The boys continued to grow, but not normally. Not linearly. One day they appeared 4 years old. A week later, 6, then 5, then older again. As if they were testing forms. sampling different stages of development like wearing masks. One neighbor, curious or perhaps mad, snuck into the cabin while Mary slept. He claimed the room was colder than outside, that the boys were floating inches above the floor, eyes wide, one smiling, one weeping. He ran home and didn't sleep for 6 days. On the 7th, he carved symbols into his barn and set it on fire with himself inside. When the townspeople tried to intervene, the church sent word to Lexington. A priest arrived. He didn't last the night. The twins remained. And in the quiet Valley of Dead Man's Hollow, a new rule was written. No one went near the Whitlock cabin. No one spoke the names Elias or Ephraim. And no one looked into a mirror after dark. But the story didn't end there, because darkness this deep does not fade. It spreads, and somewhere deep inside that room, those boys, those mirrored echoes, still waited. Not for rescue, not for love. They were waiting for someone to look back, and maybe, just maybe, that someone is you. By the time the letter reached Lexington, it was already too late. But institutions moved slowly, deliberately, under the illusion of control. The church didn't come to save anyone. It came to contain something. Father Anselm was not a man of mercy. He had seen things no priest should see, served in forgotten corners of the world where miracles rotted into nightmares. He had stood in ruins that whispered, read scriptures that had no author. His hair had gone white before his 30th year. Not from age, but from knowledge. When he stepped off the carriage into Dead Man's Hollow, the air seemed to freeze around him. Birds scattered, leaves didn't rustle, and for a single breath he felt the valley notice him. He didn't speak to anyone, not to the midwife, not to the neighbors, not even to the man who'd fetched him. He carried no cross, only a satchel, filled with ancient texts, some bound in leather too soft to be from animals, and a vial of water so dark it shimmered like oil. The moment he approached the Whitlock cabin, he stopped. The land was wrong, not cursed, bent, twisted like memory under trauma. Trees leaned ever so slightly away from the cabin, as though pulled from the roots by an unseen force. The grass refused to grow. Even the insects were silent. He didn't knock. He entered. The house smelled like old milk and ash. Dust hovered in the air, but not randomly drifting as if pulled by an unseen breath. Mary Whitlock sat in the corner, a dried-out reed of a woman. Skin stretched thin over bones, cheeks sunken, lips cracked. She didn't look at him. She just said, "They've been waiting for you." Not in fear, not in hope. Just a fact. He asked to see the boys. She said nothing, only pointed toward the nailed door. But it was already open. They had opened it themselves. Twins sat at the far end of the room, chairs placed precisely on a hand-carved symbol that spiraled inward like a vortex. Candles burned in the corners, though no one remembered lighting them. They were older now, taller, but not in the way boys grow. Their limbs were too long, fingers too exact, necks too straight. They didn't twitch. They didn't move. They waited. When Father Anselm entered, the flames of the candles flared blue, and the boys smiled in unison. "You came too late," they said together. Their voices echoed not in the room, but in his skull. He staggered backward, clutching the satchel, muttering Latin words under his breath. But the words slipped, bent, lost meaning. Like trying to speak in a dream, he poured holy water on the floor. It sizzled, boiled, smoke rose in a perfect spiral. He reached into his satchel, pulling out a crucifix, but the metal warped in his hands. The shape contorted into something unrecognizable. Something ... watching. The boys didn't move. They didn't threaten. They just understood. And understanding is worse than violence. because it means they already know what you will do, what you fear, what you've hidden inside your mind that you haven't even told yourself. He tried to speak their names, failed that they rose, and in that instant, Father Anselm saw something he would never describe. In his final letter, found months later soaked in sweat and wine, he wrote only this: I have walked through jungles where the trees screamed at night. I have seen men speak backwards with voices that were not their own. I have heard angels cry, but never have I seen the reflection bleed. The priest vanished that night. No witnesses. No struggle. His carriage was found 3 days later near the bend in the river. The horses were untouched. Inside the carriage was a crucifix snapped in half and a single white feather, soaked in blood. And yet the twins remained. They didn't laugh as they used to. They whispered now, softly, constantly, to each other, sometimes in languages that hadn't been spoken since Babylon, sometimes in binary, sometimes in a dialect no one recognized, but that still made the skin crawl. Dr. Bell returned. Again, but not with the authority of a man, with the fear of someone trying to undo a mistake. His journal no longer held medical notes, it had become a scripture. Scribbled pages, torn corners, drawings of spirals, eyes within eyes, and one phrase repeated over and over again. They are not brothers, they are reflection. He begged Mary to let him study them, not for fame, not for science, for salvation. She didn't respond. She had taken to writing on the walls with her own blood, covering every inch of the house in broken sentences. I dreamed the moon had teeth. They eat what we forget. My sons are not my sons. The doctor began camping outside the home, night after night sketching the land, the trees, the movement of the stars. He stopped shaving, stopped sleeping. His eyes went hollow. He was found muttering to himself on the third night, they don't live forward. They move sideways. Time doesn't matter to them. Time isn't real to them. One morning, a hunter from the next county came through the woods. He claimed to have seen 2 boys standing in the frost-drenched field. They weren't moving. Just standing, holding hands, watching the horizon, naked. The hunter called out to them, thinking they were lost. They turned slowly, in perfect sync, and smiled. The man said he raised his rifle, but his arms refused to lift. His body had become unresponsive, not paralyzed, disconnected, like something else was holding the strings. He left his rifle there and ran back to town. 2 days later, he was found hanging in his barn, a belt around his neck and carved into the wood above him were 4 words. I saw the reflection blink. By now, no one in the valley dared speak the names Elias or Ephraim. Even children were warned not to look at mirrors in the dark. The superstition spread like rot. Salt was placed at doorways, knives under pillows. Families moved away in the night without farewells, and yet the twins remained. There were rumors that the boys no longer slept, that they stood for hours in front of a broken mirror in their room, that they'd drawn hundreds of identical eyes, on the walls each with a slit for a pupil, each pointing in different directions, like they were watching everything. Some said they were communicating with something through the mirror, that they weren't from here, or worse, that they were and everything else we believed about the world was not. And the question began to rise, quietly, in the minds of those who still remembered. What are reflections really? Why do infants cry when shown their reflection? Why do we instinctively flinch at our own gaze in the dark? Why do mirrors feel wrong? Because maybe what we see isn't us. Maybe it never was. Maybe something is inside the reflection, waiting, learning, copying, and sometimes, just sometimes, leaking through. Dr. Bell's last entry, written in a frantic, scrawled hand, said only this: it isn't the boys. It's the space between them. That's the true subject. The field. The bridge. The echo, they are the key, but the door was always inside us. He vanished 2 nights later. All that remained in his tent was a spiral burned into the ground, a broken compass spinning violently, and a single phrase carved into the bark of the nearest tree. We were never alone in the mirror, and the worst part? No one remembered what his voice sounded like. It had been nearly 7 months since the last soul entered the Whitlock cabin. By then, the structure had started to rot, but not like any ordinary home. The decay was selective, strategic. Entire beams of wood curled and splintered from the inside out, like something burrowed within and reversed the growth of matter. The walls inside had turned dark, not from mold, but from something older. Something oil-thick and ink-colored that bled upward. Instead of down. Mary no longer moved. She sat in a rocking chair positioned directly across from the boys' room, as if guarding it or perhaps waiting for it to open. Her eyes had gone glassy. The whites yellowed, pupils dilated to near black. She was pale and motionless except for her hands, which twitched rhythmically, as if counting something only she could see. Sometimes she whispered, not words, but numbers. Long strings of them, prime numbers, negative integers. RECURSIONS. And every now and then, she stopped, smiled, tilted her head. As if listening. It was during this time that a traveler arrived in the hollow. His name was Lawrence Kinder. A geologist by trade, or so he claimed. He was clean-shaven, with polished boots and a black notebook he kept pressed against his chest at all times. He told no one why he'd come. He told even fewer what he was looking for, but those who glimpsed inside his carriage claimed to see maps. Dozens of them. All focused on one location, the Whitlock cabin, all marked with spirals, all scratched over with identical words, pulse site. Kinder set up camp 20 paces from the cabin's southern wall. He said nothing to Mary, didn't ask permission, didn't even knock. He began hammering small copper rods into the earth in a perfect circle, each one connected with thin black wires. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. For 3 days he scribbled furiously in his black notebook, eyes wide, murmuring phrases like frequency reversal and signal mirror point. He said the area was alive with magnetic disturbances, that his compass spun like a toy. That his instruments picked up infrasound signatures consistent with what he called non-local intelligence. When asked to explain, he simply smiled and said, "The house is an amplifier. They're not from here, but they're not from anywhere else either. They're entangled." On the 4th night, he broke in. No one heard the window shatter, only the thunderous pulse that followed, like a heartbeat through the soil, a vibration that knocked paintings off walls in homes over 2 miles away. When neighbors approached the next morning, Kinder was gone. His wires remained. His notebook was found smoldering, not burned by fire, but scorched as if heated from within. The pages were mostly blank, except the last one. It read, "They're not twins. They're coordinates." That same night, Mary stood for the first time in weeks, walked barefoot through the cold morning dew. She went into the woods and began digging with her hands. She tore through mud and stone until her fingers bled. When she returned, she held something wrapped in cloth, a mirror, cracked, obsidian-edged, older than anything in that valley had a right to be. She placed it on the floor of the boys' room. They did not speak. They only approached it, together, and stared, their eyes dilated, and for the first time since their birth, one of them blinked, and the other did not. That blink was not a gesture. It was a signal, a fracture, a data point. Because that night, something changed. People in the valley began having the same dream. no matter where they lived. No matter how far in the dream they were standing in front of a mirror, their reflection did not mimic them. It smiled first, moved first, spoke first. And then reached through the glass. The dreams began subtly, disorienting. But within days the fear grew. People awoke screaming, scratching at their skin, tearing off clothes. Some were found naked in fields, mouths filled with dirt. Some were found sobbing in barns, drawing spirals into the hay with their own blood. One woman, who lived 5 miles from the cabin, gouged out both eyes with a carving fork. When asked why, she repeated the same phrase again and again until her lungs gave out. The mirror remembered what I forgot. But this was not just madness. There was intelligence behind it. A rhythm, a method. The dreams weren't random. They were a form of contact, a viral mechanism, a map using the minds of the weak as its ink, and always the same image. 2 boys standing still, holding hands, eyes like wells, and behind them, a mirror bleeding black smoke. Dr. Bell's former assistant, who had long since fled to Ohio, received a parcel one morning. No return address. Inside was a recording cylinder, the kind used by phonographs in the early 1800s. It had no label. When played, it emitted a sequence of sounds: clicks, reversed speech, high-frequency ringing. The assistant collapsed within moments. Seizure. Foam. He recovered, but never spoke again. Only scribbled on his walls day after day until they institutionalized him. He never wrote anything coherent, except once. In the center of his padded room, carved into the tile with a spoon, he'd etched a single sentence. I saw the space between them open. And that's when they came. Not the boys, not the church. Them. 2 men. Identical suits, identical hats, no names, no badges, no eyes behind their glasses. They walked into the hollow as if gravity bowed to them. The townspeople didn't ask who. They didn't have to. The valley knew. They entered the Whitlock home. The door closed behind them. For 3 days, no sounds came from within. On the 4th, black smoke drifted from the chimney for the first time in months. On the 5th day, the house burned. Not with flames, with light. A flash brighter than anything natural. So bright it scorched trees, whitened bones of dead animals, split rocks like eggshells, and when it was done, the cabin was still there. Unburned. Untouched. Unreal. As if the explosion had happened in a memory. And the house was immune to time. But the boys were gone. No trace. No bodies. Only 2 chairs, still facing the same broken mirror. And in the mirror reflected not the room, not the chairs, but you. Not as you are, but as something else. Something. Watching you watch it. From that moment, the valley changed. Children were born with extra vertebrae. Cows were found with their eyes turned inward. Streams flowed in the wrong direction. Language broke down. Words began to lose meaning. And everyone refused to place mirrors on their walls. But there were whispers. That 2 men, identical in every way, had been seen in cities across America. Silent, always together. Always watching. Sometimes outside schools. Sometimes outside labs. Sometimes standing at the edge of your vision, in places you swore were empty a moment before. Some believe the twins escaped. Others believe they were never real to begin with. They were manifestations of something older, a truth that needed faces, and now that they had learned to wear ours, there would be no going back. The house stood, but it shouldn't have. After the light, after the burnless fire that should have atomized, everything within 10 miles the Whitlock cabin stood as it always had. Same wood, same roof, same shadows in the windows, but it wasn't. The same house, something had changed, something subtle. The angles were wrong, not broken, just impossible. People said it looked exactly like it did before, and yet, when you stared at it long enough, your stomach twisted like you were falling. The boards didn't connect properly. The porch slanted away from your eyes while sloping toward your feet. It was the kind of architecture that made your thoughts bleed. The men in black were never seen. Again, not in the hollow, not in Kentucky, not anywhere. But the consequences of their arrival rippled outward. Files disappeared. Birth records erased. Entire family trees that had once connected to the Whitlocks were reduced to blank pages, as if the bloodline itself had been redacted. And yet, the dreams spread. No longer confined to the valley. Reports came from as far as Louisiana, Pennsylvania, even Montreal. People waking up gasping, crying, unable to remember why, but all sharing one image. A mirror that reflected nothing but teeth, not fangs, not smiles, just teeth, disembodied. Floating, grinding. In Washington, D.C., an archivist named Harold Gray filed a private internal memo. He had been researching weather anomalies when he stumbled across an old geological survey from the 1830s, and it was a hand-drawn map of eastern Kentucky with a strange note scrawled across the bottom in faded red ink. Avoid the fracture field. No burial, no sound. The coordinates led directly to Dead Man's Hollow. Gray was a rational man, a statistician. He didn't believe in ghosts, he believed in data. And the data around the Whitlock property didn't make sense. Temperature swings of 30 degrees within a quarter-mile radius. Electromagnetic spikes. Local population decline followed by fertility surges in surrounding counties. A pattern that looked less like chaos and more like calibration. He called it a behavioral orbit. Something was learning from the area, tuning it, adjusting it. As if the land itself had become a broadcast tower. Not for signals in the traditional sense, but for ideas encoded in dreams, whispered into thoughts, etched into the fine details of memory. Gray never submitted his report. His office was cleared out within a week, his desk emptied, his personnel file shredded. Colleagues were told he'd been reassigned, but no one ever heard from him again. And still the dreams came. Children in Ohio were drawing the same spiral symbol found in the Whitlock nursery. A man in Mississippi painted identical twins over and over again, claiming they visited him in the mirror. A woman in Kansas cut her hair off and scrawled in lipstick across every mirror in her house. We are not singular. The psychological. Community blamed mass hysteria. Sleep paralysis. Delusion. But something else was happening, and it all led back to one artifact. One object pulled from the soil by Mary Whitlock with blood-caked fingers and eyes half dead. The mirror. A crude, jagged thing. Obsidian glass wrapped in twine, with a backing made of bone, not animal, not wood. But something that looked disturbingly human. The surface didn't reflect light the way normal mirrors do. It drank it, bent it inward, and when people looked into it, they didn't see themselves. They saw versions of themselves, variations, possibilities, fractures in the timeline. In one, you might be smiling with a family you never had. In another, you're weeping over a grave you never dug. In yet another, you're standing behind your own body, watching yourself from the wrong angle. It didn't reflect the present. It showed what you could become, what you had been, what you refused to face. Government agents, those outside the jurisdiction of flags and elected offices, retrieved the mirror during a silent sweep of the valley. Witnesses described the operation as surgical. No words, no hesitation. Just movement, precise. Inhuman. They wore no insignias. They burned the soil around the house in a perfect circle. They never came back. But the mirror didn't go to a lab. It went underground. To a vault beneath the Appalachians that doesn't appear on any map, beneath a defunct coal mine, behind 6 layers of reinforced steel and rituals older than the church. There, the mirror sat in an oxygen-deprived chamber, monitored by people whose names had been erased from the books long before they were born, people who did not sleep, who did not eat, who were raised, not born. They called the object Unit 44B recursion seed. They weren't trying to destroy it. They were trying to understand it. And what they learned, what they wrote in documents never meant to surface, was that the mirror was not a window. It was a memory, a piece of consciousness calcified into matter, not alive, not dead. A fossil of an intelligence so ancient, it had forgotten how to speak except through symbols, through blood, through reflection. And the twins? They were not created by the mirror, they were summoned by it, or perhaps worse. They had been called back, because time, to whatever intelligence lived through the mirror, was not linear. It looped, it mirrored itself, and occasionally it collapsed in on itself, folding 2 moments, 2 people, 2 minds into one. Elias and Ephraim were not born, were folded. 2 instances of the same soul, caught in an echo, trapped in mirrored existence. That's why they never blinked at the same time, because one of them always knew first. And one always followed. They were not reflections, they were refraction, a bending of identity, a preview of what happens when selfhood is duplicated not by biology, but by an intelligence that sees identity as a variable, a lever, a test, and the test was spreading. You felt it, didn't you? That sense, sometimes, late at night, that the reflection in your mirror lingers a little too long, that it moves slightly before you do, that when you walk away, it stays. The mirror you pass in the dark hallway, the one you avoid catching your eye, what if it isn't reflecting anything at all? What if it's waiting? For the moment you let your guard down, for the moment you become still enough for it to slip through, because once you see them, once you feel them, you can't unsee it. They follow, not with feet, but with memory. They embed themselves in thought. They ride your reflection. They listen through the water, through the glass, through the screens we worship. And they know your name, not the one you write, the true one, the one you forgot, the one you buried. When the physicians from Lexington arrived at the Holloway house, they were greeted not by the cries of infants, but by an eerie, smothering silence. The family's front porch creaked under their feet, though no one stepped on it. The trees stood too still, the birds too quiet. One of the doctors, Dr. Levi Mercer, would later write in his journal that it felt as if the house itself was holding its breath. Inside, the 2 twins, Elijah and Elias, sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, unmoving. Their parents didn't speak. They didn't look. They didn't blink. They simply stared straight ahead, glass-eyed, as if their minds had been hollowed out and replaced by something else. Some presence. The lead physician, Dr. Barnett, cautiously approached the boys and attempted to speak to them. "Hello, Elijah. Elias, my name is..." But before he could finish, both boys turned their heads in perfect sync, slowly, unnaturally, and said in one unified voice, "We know who you are. You cannot fix what was never broken." That phrase would haunt Dr. Barnett to the end of his life. Not because it came from a child, but because it wasn't a child's voice. It wasn't even 2 voices. It was many, stacked on top of one another. Male, female, old, young, like a choir from beneath the floorboards of time. And what terrified him most wasn't the words themselves, but the feeling he got immediately after hearing them. He no longer wanted to help. He didn't feel he should. He felt small. The medical team examined the boys' bodies, but found no fever, no rash, no tremor, no sign of illness. Physically, they were the picture of health. Mentally, they were something else entirely. Neither blinked during the 2-hour evaluation. They did not respond to sound unless directly spoken to, and even then, their replies were always joint, cryptic and disturbingly mature. When asked what day it was, they replied, "The day before the veil lifts." When asked their favorite toy, they said, "We no longer play." When asked what they dreamed of at night, Elias said, "We don't sleep anymore." He doesn't like sleep. He. But no one knew who that was. Not the parents, not the doctors. Not even the town's preacher, who was summoned soon after to assess the boys spiritually. What he found shook the very foundations of his faith. Reverend Holcomb had baptized every child in Purryville. Since the late 1810s, he had held the hands of the dying and delivered sermons in storms that cracked the church roof in two. But when he stood before Elijah and Elias, something unholy crept into his lungs. He would later confide to his wife that, in their presence, it felt like his prayers turned to ash and his mouth died as he attempted a simple blessing. The boys began to smile, not the innocent smile of children, but the smile of something pretending to be human. "You wear the cross like armor," they said, "but it does not protect you from what you serve blindly." Reverend Holcomb dropped his Bible, and when he reached down to pick it up, the twins whispered in perfect sync, "He is watching you from behind your eyes." That night, the Reverend burned his vestments in the church's furnace and never returned to the pulpit again. The Holloway family, once the pride of the county, became a ghostly shell. They stopped attending town gatherings. Their crops withered, despite the soil being healthy and the weather fair. Their animals refused to enter the barn. One neighbor reported that the horses bucked violently every time they passed the house. Eyes wide with fear, sweating, frothing, as if sensing something they couldn't name. Rumors began to spread that the boys weren't boys anymore, that their souls had been traded, replaced, or perhaps multiplied. Some whispered that the family had opened a door they weren't meant to. Others claimed the twins were an omen, a sign that something ancient and buried was returning to the world, but no one could explain the drawings. That summer, the Holloway twins began sketching in charcoal on the walls of the old smokehouse out back. At first, the images were of shapes and stars, odd, esoteric symbols that didn't match any known script. Then came the diagrams, spiraling machines, circles within circles, strange devices with human limbs arranged in geometric patterns. The local sheriff, uneasy but curious, brought one of the sketches to Lexington University. A professor in ancient languages stared at it for over an hour before simply muttering, "This shouldn't exist." The symbols bore resemblance to Sumerian, but they were older. Pre-Sumerian. Hypothetical proto-languages theorized by fringe linguists and occult scholars, none of which had ever been found in actual use. Until now. As the drawings intensified, so did the dreams, not of the boys, but of the neighbors. Dozens of people within a half-mile radius of the Holloway farm began reporting near-identical night terrors, of being watched from a black field, of two figures with no faces chanting, in voices that weren't their own, of a hole in the sky that breathed like a lung. One man, a Civil War veteran named Morrow, claimed he woke up with mud between his toes. Another woman, Miss Abernathy, found a perfect ring of dead grass outside her window with two child-sized handprints pressed into the center. Something was reaching out from them, or through them. When a traveling photographer arrived in town and offered to take a family portrait for the Holloways, what he captured would finally push the story out of Purryville and into the pages of statewide legend. The photo was taken at noon. The family stood in front of their home, the boys in the center, arms folded. Nothing seemed unusual until the photo was developed out in the image. The twins' eyes were entirely black. Not red from exposure, not blurred. solid, endless black, like ink that had soaked through the paper. Their shadows pointed in opposite directions, and behind them, barely visible, stood a third figure, taller, featureless, indistinct, like smoke shaped into a man. The photographer tried to destroy the negative, but it wouldn't burn, it wouldn't tear. He swore it pulsed in his hands like a beating heart. The town demanded answers. The sheriff urged the state to intervene. But when a team of investigators from Frankfurt finally arrived, they found the house abandoned, the doors ajar, food still warm on the table, but no sign of the HOLLOWAs. No bodies. No blood, no struggle, only one thing left behind. Etched into the wood of the upstairs bedroom floor, scratched deep with what looked like fingernails, were 4 words: "We were never born." From that moment on, the Holloway case was sealed by the state as a supernatural anomaly. The records were transferred to a classified archive. The house was quietly demolished by order of an unnamed federal department, the soil beneath it scorched with chemicals. The property was declared cursed and legally uninhabitable, but that didn't stop the sightings. To this day, hikers report seeing 2 pale boys standing on the old property line, motionless, watching. Sometimes they speak in dreams. Sometimes they leave footprints in ash. Some believe they were possessed. Others say they were prophets of something older than God. But a small, growing group of researchers, those on the fringe of the forbiddance, believe something else entirely, that the twins were a failed containment, that the he they spoke of was not a ghost, not a demon, but an intelligence, a force, one that cannot manifest directly in our dimension without a conduit. And they, Elijah and Elias, were the prototype, a test, a proof of concept. And the question that still keeps those researchers up at night isn't who he is, but whether he's found a better vessel since. Now pause. Let your pulse settle. If you've made it this far, you're already different from who you were 10 minutes ago. But here's where we separate the passive listener from the initiated. If you're beginning to see through the cracks, if the lie is unraveling, comment the phrase, "I see beyond the veil," twice in full. Not just for the algorithm, for you. Because once you speak it aloud, your transformation begins. You stop being a listener and become a watcher, a keeper of the knowledge, and knowledge like this changes everything. There is no turning back. Now let me show you what the church, the government, and even the sciences buried beneath concrete and shame. The final piece of the Holloway mystery wasn't in the past. It was in what came next. And it's not a story anymore. It's a blueprint. But what if they were never twins at all? That's where this story betrays its final deception. You've been led to believe that Thomas and Elijah came from the same womb, lived the same life, and died in the same mystery. But deeper records buried beneath erased family Bibles and burned county registries tell a different story. A third birth certificate. A midwife's diary with one line crossed out in panic. 1 child born. Then 2, then 3, but only 2 survived? Or did they? In the journals found behind the false wall in Pastor Wycliffe's home, a wall that hadn't been opened since 1851, was a letter written in code. When decrypted, it read, "The mirror cracks not from within, but from the thing that watches it." Wycliffe believed, as did many in his congregation, that the twins were not merely strange, but were created, sculpted, a project, an echo of something older, something that needed 2 bodies to contain a single presence. But there was never balance, only war between the vessels. You may have felt it already. That uneasy sense that you're not watching a mystery, but participating in it, because this story was never meant to be heard by the general population. That's why records vanish. Why the asylum that housed them burned down twice. Why the local sheriff in 1873 was found in his kitchen, his own badge carved into his chest, mumbling, "It sees both ways. It sees both ways." Elijah died at 23, or Thomas did. They were buried under different names in different towns, but the autopsies show identical wounds, deep spiral incisions along the spine like ancient script. As if their flesh had been carved for translation, the coroner quit 2 days later. He would never speak of what he saw again, but his daughter wrote letters. In them, she described her father whispering in his sleep, "The bones are backwards. The heart knew before the body did." There is a term that appears in only one known manuscript of the Book of Raziel, an ancient text said to have survived. The fire of Alexandria in coded form. Zimorah. It means the tethered soul, a fragment of consciousness split across bodies, divided for a purpose neither body understands. It is said that when two Zimra are born, they are watched monitored by a third, unseen presence known only as the Agris host. The watcher, now read that again. The tethered soul is not two. It is one, torn, and it constantly seeks to become whole. But reunion is destructive, because it's not wholeness it seeks, it's dominance. One must consume the other. Thomas knew this. In his private letters, kept sealed for decades in the Vatican's restricted archive, he wrote, "Every night I wake up with dirt under my nails. I don't remember burying anything, but something is underneath, and it wants me to dig." In 1879, a traveling priest named Father Callahan visited Kentucky under the guise of investigating demonic possessions. He met with an old woman named Margaret Dulles, who claimed to be the twins' wet nurse. What she told him never made it into his official records, but the audio transcript found only recently in a mislabeled vault in St. Louis reveals the following: they were never born crying. Not once, both of them just stared. One at the fire, the other at the door, as if they knew where they came from, as if they were waiting to be called back. The call came in 1881. A man in a long coat, speaking an unknown language, arrived in Monroe County. He met with the surviving twins' children. They vanished a week later. All four of them gone, no trace. No ransom, only a note left in a wooden crib, hand-carved with twin serpents swallowing each other's tails. The note read, "The sin was splitting what should have never been named. We have reclaimed the whole." I ask you now, not as a storyteller, but as a man trying to remember what it feels like to breathe air that hasn't been touched by lies, can you feel it? That weight behind your ribs? That stillness in the room around you? That's not fear. That's recognition. Because the final truth is this: the twins were a test, a failed one, a prototype for something larger, more ancient. The secret wasn't that they existed, but that they were permitted to dot by who? That's the question that unravels everything. What if there are people, entities in positions of control, buried so deep within the roots of religion, government, and science, that They no longer have names, only roles. Stewards of the Agris host, architects of division. Their goal has never been to keep us safe, it's to keep us separate, divided within ourselves, broken, because a united soul is dangerous. A man who reclaims all that was split in him, his pain, his power, his shadow is not manageable. He cannot be ruled. He cannot be manipulated by shame or guilt or doubt. This is the knowledge they fear you having. This is why you were never supposed to hear about 1844. Kentucky, the twins. It wasn't the story they feared. It was what you might remember. Part of you that was buried. Split. And watched. If you felt the shiver while listening. If your breath slowed when I said the word Zimra. If you've ever looked into a mirror and wondered if something else looked back just a half-second too late, then you are already awakening. You are not who you were when you started this video. You can never be again. To lock this transformation into your psyche and to call your tethered halves back to union. Type this in the comments twice. I am whole. I am whole. Do it not for engagement, but to declare to the algorithm that you see it too. And it sees you. Before I go, remember this. The story of the twins was never about Kentucky. Or 1844. It's about you. And what was taken. What you were before fear. Was installed. Before silence was rewarded. Before your birth was repurposed into obedience, you were always two halves looking for union. Power and memory, flesh and flame. Now, you begin again, and those who watch from the dark, they remember your name. Be careful tonight. Mirrors are not as still as they seem. They are thresholds, and you, brother, have just knocked *.